All right, picture this. A quiet line on a map suddenly becoming Europe's absolute most dangerous pressure point. What happens if Finland slams the door shut on Russia so hard that literally everything freezes?
You see, the immediate effect here isn't some cinematic sequence with explosions and sirens. It's actually a sudden, heavy physical silence. Trucks just stop. Movement completely freezes. Huge rail links become totally useless in an instant. For the towns right there on the border, normal, everyday life is completely rewritten overnight. We're talking about families who used to cross freely, now suddenly staring down locked gates and armed patrols.
So this brings us to the core question of today's explainer. What happens when one single decision sends massive shockwaves through trade, security, and global politics all at the exact same time? Because, the world doesn't just see a border closing, it sees a massive message. We're going to dive straight into the incredibly real ripple effects of a total shutdown and see exactly how a localized choice morphs into a massive global geopolitical event.
All right, let's get into the first phase, the immediate shock, where bureaucratic paralysis sets in and traffic hits absolute zero.
The initial strike here, it isn't military at all. It's simply that number, 0. Within the very first hour, border traffic drops to absolute zero. Commercial transit just halts completely. Suddenly, the air is thick with frantic emergency meetings, policy statements, and flashing alerts. It's literally thousands of people waking up to the crazy reality that crossing the border is simply no longer an option. Travelers, multi-million-dollar commerce, just completely stranded at the gate. Now, this zero-traffic reality instantly sparks dueling narratives from the sources. On one side, we have Finland framing the closure as this necessary shield, a purely defensive national security move against organized pressure, infiltration, and hybrid threats. But then, on the exact opposite side, Russia views it as a provocative strangulation. They frame it as a deliberate humiliation and an act of obedience to outside powers. And hey, we aren't here to take sides. The point is to understand that when borders break down, governments feel threatened in ways that go way beyond basic economics. It instantly becomes a total war of narratives.
Moving on to our next section, the economic and political dominoes, and those expanding ripples.
Once we step beyond those physical gates, this seemingly local decision acts exactly like a heavy stone dropped in a frozen lake. The logistical dominoes just fall instantly. Supply chains that rely on these transit routes have to scramble. Customs operations, they grind to a total halt. In the logistics sector, companies are bleeding money immediately as warehousing abruptly shifts. For transport, shipping routes suddenly have to expand, making them so much longer and way more expensive. And insurance? Yeah, those costs jump significantly. This kind of severe financial uncertainty quickly shakes up regional markets and completely rattles public confidence.
But, look beyond the spreadsheets, because there is a very real, very raw human element here. Families separated, workers stranded, travel plans completely destroyed. The absolute crucial point to remember is that geopolitical strategy always carries a devastating human cost. What starts out as a strict security measure transforms incredibly fast into a deep social wound. Trust evaporates, and those local economies that relied on border fluidity, they're completely turned upside down.
And here is exactly where bureaucracy morphs into a literal battlefield. Suddenly, exceptions become political weapons. Ordinary requests for humanitarian corridors, basic transit rights, or family reunification, they turn every single permit and checkpoint into this incredibly tense battleground of leverage. Like, one side asks for a corridor, right? And the other immediately demands intense inspection controls. So it really stops being just a border closure and becomes a pure, high-stakes contest of will.
Which brings us to Section 3, the NATO security shield and the terrifying concept of the escalation ladder.
Because remember, Finland isn't just some lone island operating in a vacuum. It's backed by a massive transatlantic security architecture, which means the danger of miscalculation absolutely skyrockets. If we trace the escalation ladder, the real danger isn't usually some sudden, full-scale invasion. No, it starts small. Step 1, maybe a sudden drone incident or a weird cyber strike. Step 2, misinformation hits and a false report spreads like wildfire. Step 3, a nervous reaction fuels a massive miscalculation. One side thinks they're just showing strength, but the other side sees an imminent threat. And then boom, Step 4, a full-blown regional crisis erupts. That escalation ladder can move under everyone's feet in the blink of an eye.
And why does this happen? Because rational calculations very quickly become emotional calculations. The source material actually emphasizes that Russia is incredibly sensitive to this idea of encirclement and humiliation in its near abroad. So a border closure directly threatens their prestige. It feeds right into this broader narrative they have of being fenced out, which massively increases the odds of aggressive posturing. You end up with each side desperately trying to prove both emotionally and strategically that they absolutely cannot be pushed around.
Now let's look at the final piece of the puzzle, a frozen geopolitical scar and our new reality. We really have to ask the hard question here. Does closing a border actually solve the underlying problem, or does it just relocate it somewhere else? I mean, Russia adapts, constantly searching for new pressure points. So this closure might reduce one exposure, but it could easily create entirely new vulnerabilities. And over time, the abnormal just becomes completely normalized. Think about it. In the first few weeks, you get fewer crossings and maybe an increased military presence. Give it a few months, and suddenly there are more cameras, advanced sensors, and anti-drone systems everywhere. Flash forward a few years, the actual physical infrastructure is permanently built around suspicion. Businesses move away, travelers find other routes, and what was supposed to be a temporary tension becomes a permanent frozen scar on the map. Fear literally becomes long-term policy.
Now, the best-case scenario for Finland relies on one really powerful concept: deterrence. It's basically the theory that if a move is painful enough, the other side just might decide not to test it. If this firm closure actually successfully deters future pressure, if it proves that the northern frontier isn't some soft target, well, it might actually force Russia to rethink using border pressure as a tool entirely. But here's the catch. Even that victory leaves behind a massive trail of economic loss, political anger, and huge social disruption. Simply winning a security argument doesn't just magically erase the damage caused by needing to have that argument in the first place.
So as we wrap up today's explainer, I really want you to think about this final, absolutely crucial question. Does closing a border actually make a region safer, or does it just push everyone into a much more dangerous game of pressure and retaliation? Geography really becomes destiny here, and a single closure like this echoes way, way beyond the snow and the chain-link fences. Think about the true price of defiance. What do you guys think? Does this strategy ultimately create real security, or is it just inviting catastrophe?